Recently, Polygon ran an article titled Games Need to Return to Black and White Morality. The piece itself is not a good read, go figure. It's almost Jack Thompson levels of reach. I assume many watching this channel already know who he is, but in case you don't, Jack was a lawyer who made a huge push in the early aughts to convince others that video games led to increased levels of violence. This has since been disproved in studies time and time again, but he never wavered and remained committed to the idea that playing GTA would push young people towards replicating in the real world the actions they committed in the game. I bring him up in regards to the Polygon piece because it argues that morally gray stories in gaming justify people's racism and fascist tendencies. And yeah, it's a mess. So hey, gaming might not make you a mass shooter, but take in one too many morally gray stories and you could become a Nazi. Welcome to Discourse 2020! But really, all that aside, I'm not actually going to be focusing too much on the article itself. It may be the catalyst for this very video and the argument I'm going to make, but I will instead be tackling its headline and the debate it kicked off and the problem with black and white morality when applied to the real world. There is another argument I can make about how layered villains just make for better long-form storytelling. I personally love big bads who have tragic backstories and whose motivations are more easily understood, but I don't want to muddy the waters and distract from my main point, so that's a topic for another time. I focus just on the headline because holy shit is it revealing in how some people actively want to see the world. The creative director at Square Enix Montreal prefaced a tweet about the article saying that he doesn't quite agree with the key takeaway, before elaborating on the responsibility of devs in the current societal climate. He then expressed a belief that sympathetic villains provide a negative impact. Just to be clear on what he was trying to imply, and to give him a fair shake, I asked if he believes sympathetic villains are detrimental to the real world, where he then told me he thinks such baddies have led to a rise in centrism. Worth adding that centrism in his view is about quelling dissent and pretending everything is fine. For the sake of my viewers, I'll avoid going on a rant about this, but let me just say that as a self-identified centrist is not about pretending everything is fine. Trust me, shit sucks, yo. But that aside, and yes, it's taking all my energy not to dwell on that last point, this creative director then further elaborated that the world, and within the context of our discussion, that entertainment itself, needs more clear discourse in action against fascism, racism, and capitalism. He even says he wants games to encourage empathy for the right people, and not for assholes and villains. Basically, he wants gaming to be used for social conditioning, which is its own can of worms, especially as anyone who has followed game journalism the past few years knows, this view is not one in isolation. Even the Polygon piece in question has a line about how false equivalencies in morally gray stories might slow down social change. Basically, many in the medium are actively trying to use gaming for social change, which is irksome in its own right. But so too is this view of black and white morality, which is worthless within our real world. Now don't get me wrong, I certainly think black and white morality has a place in fiction. Some of the oldest forms of literature are rife with it, as are some of the absolute best fantasy novels and sci-fi, and all stuff of that sort. Human myth and legend has often been told from such a place. So within gaming and other forms of entertainment, it should continue to exist. The problem here though is that in our time of great division and conflict, we should be learning to sympathize with those we disagree with. Yet as is already evidenced, people want to actively avoid it. What they don't realize, or maybe what they remain willfully ignorant on, is that most baddies aren't evil just for the sake of being evil. Psychopaths do exist, as do others who enjoy inflicting pain just because it's fun for them, but the majority of people within the real world whom we look at as evil, they got to that point via certain life circumstances. My next point may be controversial, but please just let me finish my thought before you jump to conclusions. But take a school shooter. I think we'd all agree that their victims deserve justice, be that life in prison or even the death penalty depending how you view that subject. But often such individuals choose to do that unforgivable act due to bullying, abuse, and things of that sort. I know I'm walking a fine line, so let me clarify that this isn't to defend them, nor am I justifying their actions in any way whatsoever. This also isn't to blame the victims. Kids are kids, and bullying happens. They're often not emotionally mature enough to question the negative impact they're having on those they torment. As for the shooter, they did a bad thing by murdering others, and they deserve the bad things that happened to them because of it. But it's by acknowledging the circumstances that pushed them to breaking point, and dare I say, sympathizing with it, that we can use their life experiences to keep an eye out for signs as to prevent the next kid who may be on a similar trajectory from snapping. It's through sympathy that we can better understand and care for those who are relentlessly bullied at school or victimized at home. It helps us relate to what such kids are going through, and it helps end a cycle of indifference. How often do we read stories of kids who kill themselves because the school didn't take their cries for help seriously? The same logic applies to one who goes the opposite route and becomes consumed by anger. Contrary to what some seem to believe, sympathy doesn't mean agreement. You can sympathize with someone you hate. I vehemently disagree with the actions of a murderer or mass shooter, and because of the atrocities they commit, I would even say I hate them. Again, their victims deserve justice, but we should still try to learn from them, and it's a black and white view of the world that prevents us from learning from the situations that push others towards evil. This is stating the obvious, but at its core, a black and white world paints good people as good and bad people as bad, and from my perspective, as it pertains to reality, this is a dangerous worldview to hold. Fascism and the Holocaust took off because of people's inability to sympathize with those they viewed as subhuman. We see dehumanization every day in our modern world too. Just look at politics and the shit show it has become. In quite a few circles, people on the left see the right as pure evil and want them vanquished, and matching the same sentiment, many on the right view the left the exact same way. Nowhere along the way does this accomplish anything. I would argue it's a black and white worldview that causes an alt-right terrorist to drive into a crowd of protesters. Similarly, it's a black and white worldview that causes alleged Antifa members to assault others with homemade weapons. The tragedy of current year is that too many among us no longer view those they disagree with as people. They're simply enemies who need to be defeated. And as much as I hate this word, that is problematic. Everyone is rushing to see themselves as flawless heroes and those they oppose as irredeemable villains, and look where it's getting us. So to games media and industry insiders, from where I'm sitting, you're frankly just wrong. We need more sympathy in this world, not less of it. We need more villains that depict the circumstances that push them towards villainy, because it's through understanding that we can work towards changing the circumstances that push real-world people towards a similarly dark place. This shouldn't need saying, but the world isn't black and white, and treating it as such only creates more problems and more division. Two things no one in their right mind would believe we need more of, especially in the year 2020.